All right. Hey, folks, it's Faz here from Fazlist, and I have Steve from Massive Iron. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining me.
Yep, thanks for having me on, Faz.
All right. Today, we're going to be talking about German volume training. Now, Steve and I are going to put our heads together and discuss German volume training, give you guys a scoop on what we think about it. But firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you like the content, please do go ahead and subscribe, like the video, drop any comments and questions down below. I'd love to hear from you. All right, let's crack on. So, German volume training. Firstly, Steve, let's just define what it is. What are we talking about? Now, we're talking about the basic 10 by 10. Can you give the viewers a bit of run-in into your interpretation of essentially what it is?
Well, it's a more minimal type of program where you're doing. When I say minimal, you're doing fewer exercises. You're basically using a 10 by 10 structure. There's some more complicated, nuanced aspects to German volume training. There is restricted rest in between sets. If I'm not correct, is that 90 seconds, Faz?
Yeah, I think it's pretty short, about 90 seconds.
Somewhere around there. It could be 60 to 90. But anyway, you're basically doing a 10 by 10, limited amount of exercises, limited exercise variations. And it's extremely demanding physically, I would say. And it's also been elevated over the years as probably as the most fantastical, potent, ultimate style of training there ever was.
Yeah. So I think from Steve and I's perspective, if I can speak for you, Steve, like when we see 10 by 10, we pretty much just roll our eyes and go, oh, God, not this crap again. But it seems to be the shining light for people who want to explore volume training. Like, let's say you've been happily going along, doing some fairly minimalistic training, then you go, oh, you know what? I could do with some more gains. German volume training. Maybe I should go for that. It seems to be people's first introduction to a high volume kind of training. So I want to just break down what's perhaps good about it and what's potentially, where it could be improved or what's bad about it. So in terms of good points, I guess it gets people out of the funk of very minimalistic training if that's where they're coming from. So perhaps I know that when I was part of the whole hard gainer thing, it was a very popular thing back then. People would try and experiment with it. But Robert himself had a bit of a modified, high volume sort of style of training in his book, and it was considered to be something you did every now and again. So that's kind of roughly, I guess, a good point about it. Can you think of any other good points about GVT?
Well, I'd like to just say, you'll have folks that are kind of cruising along, feeling kind of plateaued, and then they'll be like, it's like the one ring to rule them all. I'm going to return to the ring of power, the German volume training. And, obviously I'm being facetious, but that there is something in there, and that the person realizes, I'm going to go try to train really hard for whatever it is, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it happens to be. So it is seen as a hard form of training because it is a hard form of training. So that is the primary benefit, that you have somebody that wants to step up their game and train harder for a short period of time. Outside of that, it lacks, outside of that, Faz, it's very difficult to finish. I've not seen more than a handful, maybe a couple people finish it over the years. I've never seen any quantifiable results from it, scientific or just, somebody at the gym saying, I ate like a pig, I did German volume training, and here's my arm and legs measurements, and you can say, wow, you gained some mass. So the only thing I've really seen over the years people get out of it is a lot of people quitting, realizing they can't do it. They don't like it. It's just too hard.
Yeah, I think probably my first complaint would be with the rest periods. I think that's probably one of the key areas where it's going to cause problems. So I think there's a couple of consequences of rest periods. They're very short rest periods. Firstly, we generally know that 90 seconds is probably not the best for growth. At least we know that much now. I mean, and then we also look at, well, okay, if we have to rest for 90 seconds and we have to do 10 sets, and the idea is to eventually build up to the point where we're doing 10 sets of 10, and then we increase the weight, what are those first couple of sets going to actually look like? They're probably going to not look as demanding, or the weight on the bar is going to have to be very, very low. that's kind of the beginnings of my issue with 10 by 10. So I think it's something like we should be using maybe 50 to 60% of the weight. So let's assuming we're a 2-plate side squatter. We should be starting with about a plate a side. Now, is that really going to be enough to be challenging on the first set or two? And if it's not, then I guess it's debatable, well, what are we doing with those sets? It's essentially just a bit of a waste of time. Or it's setting ourselves up to have more effective sets later down the road. Is that kind of what your thoughts are on it as well? Because that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, a little bit, Faz. I mean, I'm right there with you. And there's some, there's for the individual, things can be highly variable. Like for me, I did German volume training 10 by 10 with 185 the first time I ever did it. And 8 days later, I couldn't walk. I still couldn't walk 8 days later. So I wouldn't consider that to be normal, but I could not do the next German volume training squat session. I couldn't. When I tried, so there's a lot of variance between individuals. Women, like my wife, can do a 10 by 10 on squats, and she's like, "Hey, what's next? Can I do a 10 by 10 on leg presses?" I'm like, so it can be highly variable. And one thing I don't like, Faz, is the application of like a certain set and rep scheme for every exercise. Because what I found personally, and this is just my experience, is that when I try to do a 10 by 10 on overhead press, and you're talking to someone that has a 315 seated BTN and a 315 seated overhead press. I put on I started with 180, I started with 135 Faz.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth set in, I couldn't get 10 reps. So I dropped it to 115, couldn't get 10 reps. By the seventh set, I was doing 95 pounds and couldn't get 10 reps. And I ended up like in the eighth or ninth set with 65 pounds. So that set and rep scheme for my shoulder endurance didn't work at all. That's why I'm not a big fan of arbitrary set and rep schemes for every exercise.
Yeah,
I just think that it can fall apart.
So I think a couple of things there. I think it's definitely variable by exercise and individual. So like I could probably do 10 sets of deadlifts, but there's no chance I could do 10 sets of squats. It would just kill my knees. They would just be game over. Also, I think there probably varies by exercise for the same body part as well. Like squats versus leg presses or leg extensions, for example, it would probably be a lot more palatable to do leg presses and leg extensions than squats. Squats, I think, would bury most people, regardless of whether they were suited for lift or not. So I guess there's a high degree of variability there as well. I would also say, what about the level of repetition? So for me, as I just said, with squats, if I was doing 10 sets of squats, my knees would be wrecked. I just don't thrive that very well on high volume squats. So repetition, there's that. One is the injury potential, but two is just the level of boredom, getting sat there, and the mental toll on saying, well, I've just done 2 sets of squats or 3 sets of squats. I'm pretty tired. I'm getting there. My legs are getting warmed up. They're starting to get pumped up. They're starting to get tight. And now I've got to do another 7 sets every time I go down of 10 reps. That can be very demanding and also provide quite a lot of maybe bad stress for the joints.
Yeah, everybody loves to be critical of CrossFit, Faz, because you're doing technical lifts for time. But German volume training is kind of in that family because you're doing lifts that can be unforgiving with very limited rest over and over and over again, which opens the door to not only overuse injuries, but look, you're 6, 7 sets in. You're just trying to survive the set. You're not thinking, take a big breath, brace, get my weight on my heels. You can't do that. You just, it's like if your squat form is going to fall apart if it's not 100%. It'll probably fall apart if you are 100%. So there's a lot of downsides to this program, and the repetition and the breakdown of form and how unforgiving it can be on the body is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, after a higher up set of squats, you're pretty much just trying not to die. So if you've got to do that by the 8th to 9th set and then just rest 90 seconds and go again, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems. Just before we kind of lead out, Steve, how about a couple of ways in which we can improve the 10 by 10 just for people at home? Now, I'm going to give you guys one way, and Steve has written programs which are very similar to this in the past, so I'm sure he can expand on it. But rather than doing 10 by 10, why don't you just split that workload up a little bit and do 10 sets across maybe 3 different exercises. So let's take legs. Rather than squats, it would be a lot more palatable for me to do leg extensions, leg presses, and squats, potentially in that order for 10 sets. And maybe I'd vary the sets and reps as well. Maybe I do low reps on a squat, high reps on a leg extension, and medium reps on a leg press. So I'm hitting all the fibers, and I'm varying things. It's going to make it interesting and stimulating for me. And I'm still doing 10 sets. And as we know, volume is one of the drivers of hypertrophy. So it's certainly, we're hitting all the same things, and potentially we're doing it in a way which is more palatable than just doing 10 sets and slamming them with the same exercise.
So Fez, I put together a program, I think 5 years ago, called Massive Volume Training, German volume training, you get it. But there was a study that came out, and we must note that it is a single study. And a single study should be taken for what it is. But basically, they looked at five sets versus 10 sets and found no difference in the output on hypertrophy. So again, it's a single study. Take it for what it is. But at the time, I asked myself, how would I improve, or how would I give somebody a different variation of this style of training? And now there's research out now, Faz, that shows longer rests may be actually better for hypertrophy. So we have that just entered the picture this year as well.
Yeah, I think the latest on that is that we used to think it was 3 minutes, but the latest now is, the very latest I read a couple of weeks ago, was that 2 minutes seems to be no different to 3. So the old bodybuilder average of about 2 minutes seems to be about right. Again, it's just clarifying what we probably knew all along.
So my old program, Massive Volume Training, I would cycle between 2 exercises, 2 dramatically different exercises like bench press and dips, or bench press and push-ups, or bench press and machine chest press, or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't really matter. I like to cycle the intensity a little bit. And back then I probably had 90 seconds between sets. But if I had to do it now, I would probably do 2 ways, Fast. I would probably do a 5+5 with 2 to 2.5 minute rest between sets, alternating between exercises just for a little bit of variety. Or I would probably maybe make it more conventional hypertrophy and have 3 exercises with 4 sets where you're rotating some intensity. There'd obviously be some downsides to any type of programming, but I think it'd be a little bit more fun for me.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. 2 important things there, really, just to end on. One, I think there's no magic routine which is going to be best for every factor. There's going to be pros and cons, and that's how we come to individualizing routines. What's best for you? Yeah, love it, fantastic, and I think you've got to enjoy it as well. You've got to. So we'll leave. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I just want to end with a one final note on my disdain for German volume training. I just feel it's too punishing. I feel it is just overworking movement patterns. I feel it is so intense that how it impacts you physically is more your cardiovascular system and more mental strength than it is anything else. I've not seen in 35 years, Faz, I've seen 1 or 2 people finish it, and I've never seen any quantifiable results. So if you want to dive into it and try it for the experience, go right ahead. Just know it's not the Ring of Power.
Yeah, I think we've been fairly restrained in this video, but both of us are very much on the same page. Like, it's not a routine you should be doing. I'll just say, look, if you want to try more volume, then I commend you. Definitely, like, fantastic. Good for you. But if you check out Steve's channel, if you check out my channel, there are more sensible ways of implementing extra volume, which are going to be possibly more productive and possibly less injurious. All right, folks, we'll call it there. So, Steve, thanks very much for joining me. And for you guys at home, make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll speak to you next time.
Thanks, Faz.